Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to dig into a conversation with Andrew Clavon.
Right, from that trigonometry interview. He had some, well, strong takes on the current cultural landscape in America.
Exactly. And you mentioned wanting to sort of get a handle on these big societal shifts, but without, getting totally swamped by information. So that's our goal today.
Yeah, we're using the transcript from the YouTube video, We Need a Cultural Resurrection, Andrew Clavon, from the Trigonometry channel is our main source here.
Our mission then is to kind of unpack Clavon's main arguments. Things like this perceived cultural corruption he talks about, the media's role.
And this idea he has of a possible cultural resurrection,
hmm
we want to give you a concise but still pretty thorough grasp of where he's coming from.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Clavon, he's known mostly as a novelist, screenwriter.
Right.
But he explains he moved more into cultural commentary because he saw, well, what he calls widespread corruption.
In the news media and Hollywood specifically.
Yeah, especially after 9/11. He felt there was this dominant narrative that was basically blaming America for the attacks.
And that leads into his idea of a conspiracy of interests, which sounds...
Yeah,
we-
it sounds dramatic, yeah. But he clarifies, doesn't he? It's not some secret cabal.
No, exactly. More like a situation where certain viewpoints, generally left-leaning ones, just tend to get favored. And he argues this benefits big corporations and has kind of taken root in cultural institutions.
Okay, and then there's this fascinating bit about his prediction, Trump's reelection.
Oh, right, yeah. He saw that as a moment where the empire of lies, that's his phrase for mainstream media, was basically shown to be, well, irrelevant.
Kind of losing its power, maybe, because of alternative media.
Precisely. He points to places like the Daily Wire, Joe Rogan, Megyn Kelly.
Right, yeah.
People who could, in his view, debunk narratives almost instantly.
It's like contrasting media portrayals of Biden with, videos everyone could see online.
Exactly. He even uses this analogy, comparing it to the American Revolution, these alternative voices taking pot shots at the establishment media.
But just taking pot shots isn't enough for him, is it?
No, not at all. He thinks beating the mainstream media isn't really winning. The next step, he argues, is building up serious reporting power on the right.
And cleaning house, sort of?
Yeah, distancing the right from voices he calls despicable.
Mm-hmm.
Anti-Semites, extreme reactionaries. His aim is for a new kind of establishment news media that's actually focused on truth-telling, based on the idea that people come first.
So what's behind this shift? Why now?
Technology, mainly.
Mm.
The internet. He sees it as revolutionary, like the printing press.
Okay, because it empowers different voices.
Exactly. It lets people bypass the traditional gatekeepers. He argues figures like Trump really broke through this system of lies and censorship, partly by just ignoring accusations and saying what they thought.
Right. But the trigonometry hosts, they pushed back a bit there, didn't they?
They did. They raised the point that maybe this new media landscape inherently favors the loud and extreme. Sensationalism.
Which could end up amplifying the very voices Clavon dislikes. They used a hypothetical example, I think.
Yeah, something about Epstein and transgender issues. And Clavon, well, he acknowledges that uncertainty. He admits it could go that way.
But he's still hopeful.
He seems to be. He expresses faith in the basic decency of most Americans, especially outside the big cities. He thinks, facts will eventually win out and cooler minds will prevail.
How does he describe people holding those extreme views he dislikes?
Interestingly, not necessarily as unintelligent, but as being caught in a maze that has no exit, like trapped in an ideology.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. He talks about religion, too, a potential reawakening.
Yeah, that was quite a striking claim. He suggests we might be at the start of a genuine religious reawakening.
Driven by what?
By a perceived failure or collapse of purely materialistic scientific assumptions. He points to physics development since Newton as undermining that old certainty.
And he thinks intellectuals will start converting, like the Oxford movement.
Yes, the parallel he draws, yeah. He mentions his son's book, Light of the Mind, Light of the World, and also Rostout's Believe as sort of tapping into this trend.
He acknowledges the dangers, right, fundamentalism and all that.
Oh, absolutely. He's aware of the potential for abuses, but he hopes for a more, let's say, reasoned and positive articulation of faith in public life.
Using the transgender issue as an example.
Right. Arguing from a position of the goodness of creation, as he puts it, rather than just calling things unnatural. It's a different framing.
And how does the media fit into this religious picture, according to him?
He argues the media is generally hostile to God and traditional values.
Why?
Because, in his view, It challenges their agenda, an agenda he describes pretty starkly as a culture of death, focusing on abortion, denying human nature, devaluing marriage and kids.
And he thinks they unfairly focus on the extremes within religion.
Yeah, to discredit faith overall. That's his argument. He feels they pick out the worst examples.
He also contrasted the U.S. with Britain, didn't he, on discussing difficult topics?
He did. He mentioned feeling there's less open discussion in America on complex ethical things, like IVF. It gets replaced by what he called teardrop journalism, or just accusations of extremism.
The conversation then brought up progressivism, the idea of maximum liberty for all.
Right, and the potential clash there. If there's a religious revival, does that inevitably mean less liberty for some people?
And the idea of a snapback from woke craziness also came up,
It did. Now, Clavon positions himself as very pro-liberty.
but with caveats.
Exactly. He believes human nature is flawed, sinful even, so boundaries are necessary. Abortion is his key example here.
He finds it morally abhorrent.
Yes, calls it a horrible atrocity, killing innocent people, emphasizing the unborn child's lack of voice.
But he also sees the practical problems with banning it.
Right. He recognizes how difficult and potentially damaging an outright ban would be when so many see it as a human right. He actually advocates for persuasion, for dialogue, over legal force.
Even in cases he sees as extreme.
Yes, because the alternative, he fears, is escalating conflict, maybe even civil war. So convincing people through truth is his preferred path.
And where does the division in the country come from, in his view? Who's fanning the flames?
He puts a lot of blame squarely on the mainstream media. NBC, ABC, CBS, The New York Times, Washington Post.
Why them specifically?
He argues their overwhelming bias towards the left fuels constant anger and division. It creates the state of fury on the right, he thinks, which then leads to some of those extreme statements he dislikes.
So fixing the press would fix the division.
He believed reforming the press would significantly help, reduce the hatred.
This ties into his point about the cultural monopoly, doesn't it? The left dominating arts and entertainment.
It does. He talks about late-night comedy, Hollywood, how it alienates large parts of the country.
But he doesn't want the left to just stop creating.
No, not at all. He wants the right to get in the game, to actively participate, make movies, do comedy, offer different perspectives. He thinks that diversity of voices would actually diminish extremism because more people would feel represented.
He had some pretty strong words for Joe Biden, too.
He did. Called him probably the worst president this country ever had, citing corruption, mean-spiritedness, censorship.
And contrasted that with the media portrayal.
Sharply. He argues the left's cultural dominance prevents a fair, critical look at their own side's actions and leaders.
What about Elon Musk buying Twitter? Did Clavon see that as significant?
Hugely significant. A pivotal moment, he suggested. Not because Musk is necessarily right-wing, but because he challenged the censorship, opened the doors to more voices.
Breaking that dominance.
That's how Clavon sees it,
Yeah.
Crucial for tackling the rigidity and division.
The trigonometry hosts also mentioned this feeling of latent anger in America, tied to the economy, maybe?
Yeah, the feeling that the American dream is slipping away. Clavon agreed the country is deeply broken economically.
He criticized the Biden administration on that front.
Yes, for being disconnected from the reality of inflation, rising prices hitting ordinary people. He also thinks industries like Hollywood are struggling because they don't understand their audiences anymore.
He also brought up the national debt, didn't he?
He did, expressed real concern. Pointed out that servicing the debt now costs more than defense spending.
Which is historically a bad sign.
A potential indicator of collapse,
Yeah.
historically speaking, He also hit out at high taxes without clear benefits.
What about Trump's approach to the economy? How did Clavon frame that?
He presented Trump's goal as revitalizing American industry, emphasizing making stuff
Yeah,
here.
they're with automation challenges.
He acknowledges that, but sees potential in bringing jobs back. Fostering innovation, space exploration was an example he gave. He contrasted this with what he sees as a more stagnant, regulation-heavy approach from the left.
Like historical innovation solving problems.
Exactly. He used the analogy of catalytic converters solving LA's smog problem back in the day. Innovation finding a way.
And his view on capitalism itself. It wasn't entirely positive, was it?
No, it was quite nuanced, actually. He called it the greatest engine of wealth and creativity ever invented.
Right.
But also something that ruins everything. A double-edged sword.
So what's the solution?
He suggests the right needs to blend capitalism with, Christian values. advocating for social responsibility, ensuring a basic standard of living, dignity for everyone.
Not necessarily through redistribution, though.
No, more through collective solutions, ensuring basic decency alongside the market.
Let's talk about Disney. The live-action remakes came up, specifically Snow White.
Oh, yeah. He sees that as a prime example of this cultural corruption driven by woke ideology, as he calls it.
That specifically bothered him, the casting.
The casting, yeah, but also the rejection of the traditional story elements.
Yeah.
The handsome prince. He sees it as denying basic human truths captured in those old stories.
He emphasized the origin of those fairy tales, too, right?
He did. That the grim tales originally came from women, representing their collective wisdom about life, raising children, human nature.
So, messing with the stories is messing with that wisdom.
That's his argument. That the inability to retell them authentically shows a denial of these deep truths.
And the song, Someday My Prince Will Come.
Reportedly being cut, yeah. He sees that as another attack on traditional ideas about romance, about men and women naturally pairing up. He thinks that core idea is what's really under attack.
This connects to his views on gender issues, I imagine.
Absolutely. He's very critical of the idea that biological sex can be changed, cites a lack of scientific evidence.
He mentioned Rachel Levine.
Yes, as an example of what he sees as defying biological reality. He views the intense focus on transgender issues, particularly for kids, as an attack on the natural bond between men and women, possibly even rooted in misogyny.
Misogyny, how so?
Well, that leads into his definition of anti-feminism. It's not about denying choices.
What about valuing motherhood more?
Exactly. He thinks society should elevate motherhood and homemaking, seeing it as vital for a free society, and a role women are often particularly suited for. He links feminism's rise partly to the Industrial Revolution, taking away women's economic power from home-based work.
And thinks the computer age could reverse that.
Potentially restore some of that economic power, yeah. He feels American culture currently denigrates mothers, whom he calls soul shapers.
Okay, so given all this critique, especially of Hollywood, do the hosts ask if things might change? A shift away from woke crap, as they put it.
A good asset, yeah. Pointing to maybe figures like Bill Maher or Gavin Newsom seeming to moderate.
Was Clavon optimistic?
Less so about change within the big studios. He thinks they're driven more by prestige, internal status, not just pure profit.
So where will the change come from, in his view?
Independent creators. Competition. Technology lowering the barrier to entry for filmmakers, writers, whoever, people connecting directly with audiences.
Bypassing the studios.
Essentially, yeah. He even sees AI as a potential game changer, reducing the need for traditional structures, maybe even actors eventually.
He called it a Martin Luther moment.
He did. The internet spreading alternative ideas like the printing press did. But he also acknowledged the potential for conflict that followed the printing press, the religious wars. History repeating, perhaps.
So it ends on a choice then.
Pretty much. A cultural choice. React to things you dislike with anger and destruction, or react with creativity and build something new.
Okay, so let's try and summarize Clavon's core argument here. We've walked through his view on what he sees as a deep cultural crisis in America.
Right. Characterized by, in his perspective, a corrupt mainstream media, an ideology he calls woke, that denies basic truths, and this urgent need for a cultural resurrection.
And that resurrection, for him, involves truth-telling, maybe a rediscovery of faith, and definitely more diverse voices, especially right-leaning ones, in arts and media.
So for you, the learner, hopefully this deep dive offered some solid insights into Clavon's analysis, his critique of media, his hopes for change.
Yeah, his focus on truth, open discussion, even on really tough subjects, and the power of creativity. It definitely gives you things to think about as you navigate, all the information out there.
Absolutely. It's a complex perspective with a lot of layers.
And maybe a final thought to leave folks with. Considering Clavon's argument for this cultural resurrection, what role could an individual listener even play in fostering the kind of culture he envisions? Or challenging it?
That's a great question. How does your own media consumption, your own engagement with these cultural narratives, fit into the picture he's painting? Does it reinforce his view or push against it?
Something to definitely mull over. We encourage you to reflect on Clavon's points, maybe even check out the original interview if you're curious.
For sure. This deep dive is just a starting point. Exploring these themes from different angles is always worthwhile.